Good morning. We're going to be reviewing the plan sheet requirements for a Coast Guard bridge permit. We generally find this to be one of the more cumbersome exercises during the permit process. So what we're going to do today is take a look at the Coast Guard plan sheet job aid that we've made available, and we're going to walk through several different examples. For those in the room, please feel free to ask questions as we go along, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. For any of those who are online who have any questions, just go ahead and raise your hand. Brian will point you out to me, and we'll try to get to you as soon as we can. And as an aside, we are recording today's presentation. All right, so let's start with a quick show of hands in the room. I mean, we've got only 5 people in the room, but we'll be talking to those online. How many folks have actually dealt with the development of plan sheets for a Coast Guard bridge permit? Anybody here in the room? Okay, I'm getting a goose egg. How about online? Brian, anybody raising their hands? All right, let's talk objectives. First, we're going to show you where you can find the materials that will actually get you through this process. Second, we'll then walk through the plan sheet job aid. And third, we're going to walk through a few examples, and we're going to discuss some common issues that seem to pop up from time to time when you're actually putting together plan sheets. All right. As with everything else we've been offering you in terms of job aids, you'll be able to find the materials you'll need to get through the plan sheet process on our website. If you need the QR code, it's going to pop up on the screen later, but you can also find it pretty easily by just Googling Coast Guard Office of Bridge Programs. Either way, once you land on that page, just click Bridge Permits tab, which is circled here in red. Our plan sheet job requirements are listed in the Bridge Permit Application Guide, but we also have a separate plan sheet job aid available as a separate document for easy viewing, and we prefer that you use that version. As indicated here, you'll find links to both the BPAG and the plan sheet job aid. The job aid is available as a fillable Word template for download from our Bridge Program website. This job aid template found online is a more up-to-date version than the one that you'll find in the BPAG. So we ask that you please always either download it or, barring that, just talk to your Coast Guard Bridge project officer who will be at this 7th District down in Miami for a copy. Okay, as we hit upon earlier, the requirements for plan sheets are codified in federal regulations. Some exciting reading in Title 33 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Drill down to Chapter 1, Subchapter J, Part 115, Section 50, and voila. Here you'll find the requirements for an application for a bridge permit to include the basic plan sheet requirements. Subparts F through I detail the requirements for the bridge permit application. Now, to facilitate a smooth application process, we do ask that you please use the BPAG and follow the format and requirements for a permit application. The plan sheet requirements can be found in checklist format in the Bridge Permit Application Guide, but a word of caution. We're in the midst of revising the BPAG, and the plan sheet job aid will eventually become a separate appendix. As mentioned on the last slide, please use the plan sheet checklist found on our website rather than the one found in the current version of the Bridge Permit Application Guide. While the updates are few and subtle, they make everyone's use of it just a bit easier. You'll also find several plan sheet examples for applicants to utilize when submitting their bridge permit application. In a few slides, I'll walk through a couple of examples of bridge permit plan sheets. All right. Let's take a look at the format of the plan sheet job aid once you've actually opened it. There are 9 different sections in the plan sheet job aid. They are, first, the general section, which discusses the general requirements of plan sheets, the title block section, a section that discusses the location and vicinity view, the plan view section, the elevation view section, the typical section view section, and then we've got a section for details of the bridge protective system, more commonly referred to as fenders. We've also got a section for identifying any temporary structures or falsework that will be used during construction of the bridge. And finally, there's a section for temporary bridges, which would be required for a Coast Guard public notice and final permit approval. Temporary bridges must be a part of the plan sheet set submitted for permit approval. Otherwise, a permit amendment will later be needed. There are usually a few additional items that you won't have available when you receive your bridge permit, but this stuff must nonetheless be submitted to the district bridge office before you commence construction. These items include the details of the bridge protection system, details for temporary structures falsework, which is mentioned in the last slide, are different from temporary bridges, and details for the bridge lighting plans. Those are separate and normally decided upon much later in the design and construction process. All right, the plan sheet job aid that we're presently using and is available on our bridge program website was recently revised in May of last year. We find it best if applicants submit a filled out copy of the plan sheet job aid when submitting plans to the district bridge office to show that it was used while developing the plans. The Coast Guard also utilizes the plan sheet job aid when we review the plans. Now, after our review, it's common for the district office to send a copy of the filled out plan sheet checklist directly back to the applicant with any comments and updates that they may require. All right, let's start by taking a quick look at the main components of the job aid, and then we'll discuss each in greater detail. The checklist was developed as a tool to facilitate proper plan sheets for bridge permitting. If you ever have any questions, please be sure to reach out to your local Coast Guard district bridge office. When an item asked for is not applicable, please make sure that you check the NA box, which should be provided whenever necessary. Looking here at pages 1 and 2, you'll see page 1 is just the cover, and the job aid starts with the general requirements section at the top of page 2. Looking down to the second red circle on the bottom right, you'll next see section 2, which is the title block section. Here's a quick look at pages 3 and 4 of the plan sheet job aid. The title block section continues on the top left of page 3, and then we move into the requirements for location and vicinity map. After that, we'll be in section 4, which addresses the plan view requirements, which continues through page 4. On page 5, we'll find the elevation view requirements. Page 6 shows the requirements for a typical section view, followed by the bridge protective system section, when one is required and details are known at the time of permitting. Next, you'll see the section for temporary structures or falsework, followed by section 9, which is for temporary bridges. Finally, the last page includes the requirements I previously mentioned for when items aren't available, nor required at the time of permit approval, such as specific details for a bridge protective system, temporary structures, or for the bridge lighting. All right, now that I've shown you all that stuff, I'm actually going to skip section 1, which identifies the general requirements, and I'll circle back to it towards the end of the presentation, as it'll all make a little more sense after we first review the rest of the requirements. We're now going to review some sample plan sheets, and as I do, I'll be identifying the components of the checklist by identifying them on each sample, since you don't have the checklist in front of you. All right, so let's start by taking a closer look at the title block requirements. Which start, yeah.
Just before we get into
Mm-hmm.
quick question.
Hit me.
So, did you want us to use the BPAG for everything except plan sheet?
Yes, we have a separate plan sheet job aid. Yes, and again, eventually that's going to be an appendix to the BPAG. So, you know, the administrative grind. Exactly. The administrative grind never stops. So yeah, we're in the midst of revising that. So yeah, for now. And again, what we'll do is when we've got everything nailed down, I'll actually hit everybody up on the Gov delivery. I was on an email to everybody, just letting them know that, hey, this is how we're doing this now. But for now, yes, use the separate checklist.
And I guess I could use my microphone.
Okay,
The other
yeah.
question, is there any guidance or requirement for maps to be readable in black and white?
Well, generally, I mean, when we're doing this, yeah, we're using either black, white, or grayscale. And again,
Okay.
you'll see in further detail as we move along. The only reason why you're seeing color, why you will be seeing color in this presentation is because I'm trying to use it to highlight specific sections. Okay. I'm going to apologize in advance because some of this may be a bit hard to read for those trying to see their slides on the monitor. But of course, yeah, it looks like you've all got there. So, all right, let's roll into this. Here's an example for a plan sheet title box for a bridge over the Sammamish River in Washington State. We've expanded the title block located at the bottom right of the plan sheet out to show it a little bit easier, and that's in that red box. Let's take a look at the requirements found on the plan sheet checklist. The applicant owner is identified as the City of Kenmore. The name of the bridge is shown as the West Sammamish River Bridge. The waterway name is identified at the Sammamish River at mile point 0.5. For the city, county, and state, the project is shown as Kenmore, King County, Washington. The plans are dated October 4th, 2019, and were stamped and signed by a professional engineer that same day. The title block is for an elevation plan view, and the plans indicate that there are a total of 4 plan sheets for this bridge project, and they've labeled this sheet as page 3 of 4. Other than changing the page name number, the title block normally remains the same on each page of the plan sheets. Now, one item not seen here in the title block, which was commonly required, is listing the name for a consultant or agent. For this particular project, there wasn't a consultant, so we were able to go and skip that particular step. All right, moving on. Now let's look at 2 different examples of a location and vicinity plan sheet. These requirements are listed on page 3 of the plan sheet job aid. The purpose of the location and vicinity plan sheet is to provide the viewer with an accurate location of the proposed bridge project. Pardon me one second. What we have here is a fantastic, great example of a really lousy location vicinity plan sheet. This is not what you want to do. This plan sheet was actually initial submission for a bridge replacement project, but not the final version that received Coast Guard approval. All right? Just by taking a look at it, you can see just how busy and difficult to read it is. Now remember, the purpose of a Coast Guard plan sheet isn't for construction purpose. These are not construction grade. They're informational and are intended to clearly depict the project and its proposed clearances in a manner that the general public can understand. Not engineers, but the general public. Now, running through the checklist, we do see that some of the required items, such as a graphic bar scale and north arrow, which are both circled in red. Now, if you squint real hard, you may be able to identify what body of water this bridge is located on, which is the Magothy River, identified in the center of blue. However, the location map is much smaller than we'd like, barely showing anything in the middle of the plan sheet. The ebb and flood, also in blue, is depicted, but again, barely discernible. You can't see the adjacent property owners of the bridge, which is a requirement, nor are there any wildlife or waterfowl refuges or historical or archaeological sites identified. We'd likely reach back to the applicant to ensure that this is not an oversight, since we'll likely be speaking to the applicant about other necessary changes. Lastly, hunting around this plan sheet, you figure out this is actually in the state of Maryland if you look down to the title block on the bottom right in green, but there's no small map of the state on this plan sheet, which makes it kind of difficult to actually determine this at a quick glance. With all that said, there are too many unnecessary notes on the plan sheets. If all the excess verbiage was eliminated, the location map could be enlarged for easier viewing. All right, now this is a much better example of what we're looking for. If we bounce this plan sheet off against the location and vicinity plan sheet requirements on the job aid, we'll see the following. First, it's easy to determine that the project is located in California by simply looking at the right side of the plan sheet. Moreover, we can easily figure out that it's in LA County with an arrow showing the location of the proposed project on the bottom right, which we've highlighted in green. In red, we see both the north arrow and the graphic bar scale. We also see the location of the bridge identified as LA Long Beach Harbor. Circled in blue, we see the direction of the ebb and flood of the waterway that's present, and the structures identified adjacent to the proposed bridge, such as Pier 400, the FedEx terminal, and the Navy fuel depot. Waterfowl and wildlife refuges and historical sites are not identified as present here on this plan sheet, but this is also a heavily urbanized and semi-industrial area. Now, this is the sort of plan sheet that will be easy for the public to digest as part of a public notice, allowing them the opportunity to determine where the project is and how it might impact their waterway usage. Now, let's dig into a few examples of the plan and elevation views. All right, simply explained, the plan view is the top-down view of the bridge, as if you were looking down from above the bridge, while the elevation view is the side view of the bridge, as if you were looking at the bridge from the waterway. We're generally good with applicants combining plan and elevation views on one plan sheets, depicting both running parallel to each other, which allows for a clear depiction of the navigational openings. So, let's take a look at an example in which the plan and elevation views were included on one plan sheet. We'll then take a closer look at each view separately. Okay, here's an example of how plan and elevation views can be depicted on a single plan sheet. This was the set for the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge in Washington, D.C. This project involves the replacement of the existing drawbridge with a higher level and more aesthetically pleasing fixed bridge. This plan sheet has been cropped just a bit at the bottom to make it easier to read, so you're not going to see the entire title block. You'll see the plan view on the top half of the sheet and an elevation view on the bottom half. All right, so first we're going to view the top, which depicts the plan view against the job aid that starts on page 3. The first requirements are for the graphic bar scale and north arrow, both of which are shown in red. You can see those outlined in red. In blue, we see that the applicant has identified the adjacent property owners on the 4 corners of the proposed bridge. We also see the existing shorelines notated in green and the ebb and flow symbol for the waterway, which is circled in purple. So we zoomed in a little tighter so you can better see in blue how the adjacent property owners are clearly indicated on both sides of the abutment. Additionally, the existing shorelines, or in this case, bulkheads, are readily identifiable, which we've circled in green. The next requirement for the checklist is for mean high and mean low water lines. Since this is a bulkhead, they're shown as one and the same here in red, which is allowed on the checklist. Finally, we're circled in purple the helpful note from the applicant that the existing pier would be removed during construction of the new bridge. Again, we've cropped this so it's a little bit easier to visualize, but on the right, we can see the east bank of the project that's also defined in red by a bulkhead. You'll additionally note on the right, and circled in red, the labels for the existing Army Corps of Engineers levee on the southeast riverbank abutment. Now, if you squint real hard, you may notice below that, circled in orange, we have an existing fuel pier, which was eventually relocated before the new bridge was built. All of this stuff constitutes valuable information for mariners, and we in the Coast Guard think it's a good idea for it to be included when we generate a public notice. We circled the ebb and flood cycles for the channel in brown, as well as the mean and low water lines on both sides of the waterway. In this particular circumstance, no portions of the existing to-be-replaced bridge were to remain in place, so that optional item on the job aid turned out to be not applicable. But the purple box towards the top illustrates the existing structure that will be removed in grayscale, or grayed out dashed lines. The job aid doesn't specifically prescribe grayscale, only that the structure to be removed be depicted in a, quote, discernible manner, unquote. That much said, we found that grayscale tends to work best, and that's the easiest expedient that you can use. We also asked for the principal dimensions of the project in the job aid, including length and out-to-out width. The overall length of the bridge is outlined in yellow as 1,445 feet, and the applicant also notes where the existing bridge fenders are to be removed. The blue box towards the right, meanwhile, denotes the width of the bridge, which in this case varies between 133.5 feet to 166 feet. This bridge project will not have a fender system, so identifying the location of the bridge protective system, piles, cables, etc., that's really not applicable for this particular project. But if it were, those locations would also need to be shown. Now, the horizontal clearances are called out in the green box, with 150 feet of horizontal clearance in the navigation channel and 492.5 feet clear span opening. That's basically going from pier to pier. And lastly, the small red box identifies the varying channel depths between 18 to 22 feet. So, as you can see, there's still a lot going on here. So we're trying to simplify the plans as best as we can while meeting the requirements, and we always prefer that. All right, let's now take a look at the elevation view requirements for a plan sheet. The elevation view is the bottom portion of that same original combined plan sheet. Now, here again, you can see circled in red the graphic bar scale in the center. Both bridge piers require fill, so the applicant added a table, indicated here by the red box, and the corresponding quantities of fill at the bottom left of the plan sheet. We've got circled in blue the mean high and the mean low water elevations. The difference between those two is almost 3 feet. The navigational opening is again depicted in green, and it's offering mariners 150 feet of horizontal clearance. The vertical clearance of 42 feet is denoted in the purple box, but that number does bump up to 43.25 feet as the actual center line of the channel. The applicant additionally noted the clear span horizontal clearance at low steel between the piers as 492.5 feet. Circled in yellow is a low steel elevation in the navigation span for the roadway, measured at 43.25 feet, and again, at the base of the pier at 20.83 feet. The checklist will next ask about drawbridges, but since this bridge is a fixed structure, that section will be essentially moot. Okay, as we continue digging in this particular plan sheet, we can clearly visualize the existing contour of the waterway bottom, which we've outlined in red. Meanwhile, the applicant also included a dash line, which indicates the existing ground line. In blue, the 100-year flood elevation is identified on the west side of the structure as 10.92 feet. The bridge will not have a permanent traveler system, so that requirement on the job aid is not applicable. If it were to have one, though, then it would have to be included in the plan sheet as well. Now, in green, you can also see the required professional engineer stamp and signature on this plan sheet. This is a requirement for all plan sheets prior to Coast Guard approval. All right, now that we've looked at each requirement for both plan and elevation views, let's revisit the plan and elevation view parallel to each other. Now, looking at this plan sheet, we see that the applicant captured all the requirements needed for both a plan view and elevation view on a single page. There were only 4 total plan sheets required for this project, which was big and extraordinarily complex. So I just tossed an awful lot of information at you guys in a very abbreviated fashion. So before we proceed, any questions? Yes, sir.
Just, is there, a line indicating any existing bridge, or is this all just the proposed?
No, they did, again, in the grayscale, you can see on the top, that's the existing bridge in grayscale.
Okay, all right.
So again, and you'll see, we want it noted in some discernible manner. We find that it's easiest to utilize grayscale for the existing bridge that's, for the bridge that's going to be replaced or removed.
Mm-hmm. But that's not showing in the elevation view, or am I just not seeing it?
Yeah, if you take a look at what you got here, you can see it in grayscale there at the top.
Oh, yeah, no, on the top I can see that. I'm talking about the elevation.
Yeah, elevation
view
view that probably get a little bit clunky.
Okay, that's fair. And then the negative numbers for the riverbed, is that from the high or low water mark?
The negative numbers, I think you're looking at elevation levels.
Yeah, I am.
Tough to discern.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did note the mean high, mean low water lines. That's really three things we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
At least in tidal waters, mean high, mean low, 100-year flood.
Mm-hmm.
Non-tidal water may be looking at ordinary high water, ordinary low.
Yeah, and the negative numbers at the waterbed, that's to show how much, I don't know what the bottom part of a boat is called.
How deep in the hull? How deep? The keel.
Yeah, okay.
That's beneath the keel, yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks.
All right, I did mention movable bridges a little while ago, so let's take a quick look at how you gin up the plan sheets for those. What we have here is a plan sheet for a bascule drawbridge. The plan sheet job aid identifies the requirements for movable span bridges, shown here in the red box, to depict the draw in both the open and closed positions. For bascule bridges, we also ask the applicant to specify which parts of the channel have unlimited clearance in the open position, since that can be constrained at times. On this plan sheet, you can see in blue that there is 50 feet of horizontal clearance available when the bascule leaf is in the open position, providing for unlimited vertical clearance. When the draw is closed, though, you'll see in the green boxes that the bridge allows for a 7-foot minimum vertical clearance near the pier, and then 7.75 feet in the channel at mean high water. Okay, and here we got another example of a movable bridge, this time showing a swing bridge in both the closed, the top view in red, and the open, which is bottom view in blue. You should be able to notice how the vertical clearance changes when the span opens. When the bridge is in the closed position, vertical clearance is limited to no more than 8 feet, but when it's open, mariners have an unlimited vertical clearance to proceed through the navigation opening. Okay, we're getting there. Let's talk about section views. Section view plan sheet requirements are found on page 5 of the plan sheet job aid. We cropped this plan sheet again for easier viewing. As usual, outlined in red is the graphic bar scale. The out-to-out width we circled in blue, which in this case is 34.8 feet. Now, this is a plan sheet for a railroad bridge. Outlined in green, you can see the widths depicted for the northern track, which is on the left, and then the southern track on the right. In some instances, a bridge may have portions where the structure is wider at certain spots. An example would be that there's a pedestrian overlook that's wider on a bridge pier. These instances should be noted on the plan sheet. This plan sheet also illustrates in the purple box on the bottom labeled Detail A, an expanded view for utilities on the bridge such as the fiberglass conduits. When we speak to appurtenances to the bridge, such as this is one area on the plan sheets where we do not require measurements to be in decimal format as we do for all other measurements. In those circumstances, we will allow for normal industry nomenclature, such as 8.5-inch water line, 2x6 wooden post, or in this case, a 2x2 foot conduit line. Otherwise, though, we require all measurements to be in decimal format. All right, here it is, yes and no, pretty straightforward. Please use decimal format when depicting measurements. Looking to the left, we see an example of how not to listen measurements, and on the right, we see the required decimal format. So, left is bad, right is good. Okay, this may not apply in Georgia, of course, unless you're going to build a bridge to England, but there is a specific requirement for international bridges, such as this example for the Madawaska International Bridge in New York, that all dimensions and distances must be depicted in both linear feet on top and meters on the bottom. Okay, let's circle back now and finally discuss the general plan sheet requirements, which are listed at the beginning of the job aid. These general requirements really help the Coast Guard consider the full scope of the bridge project at hand. First and foremost, please use the plan sheet job aid template. The whole process goes much more smoothly when you follow that. We ask that all plans be provided in a standard 8.5 by 11-inch format. We also ask that you please provide the fewest amount of plan sheets as possible. We often see plan sheet sets ranging from 3 to 5 pages in length that meet all of our requirements. All right, and as I keep on hammering home, these plan sheets are provided for the general public for review and comment through the issuance of a Coast Guard public notice. So plan sheets should be written so that the general public can understand them. These are conceptual drawings that we use to approve the navigational clearances on the waterway, not construction drawings.
Jim?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be 8.5? Sorry, just based on the last slide's
something?
instruction.
Busted. Duly noted. We'll put this on the lessons learned. Caught me. Okay. All right. As we've shown on the plan sheet samples, all plan sheets must bear the date and signature of a professional engineer before being approved for final permitting. Remember, all navigation lighting plans are submitted separately to the Coast Guard, not in the bridge permitting plans. All right, and you're going to normally coordinate this after you receive your signed permit. And finally, when not required, our preference is that all plan sheets be in landscape format whenever possible. It's a Coast Guard Bridge Program policy that prior to permit issuance, all plan sheets must bear the date, signature, and stamp of a professional engineer's. PEs may, at their discretion, add verbiage to the effect that these are conceptual plans utilized to obtain a Coast Guard bridge permit. I know that sometimes engineers can be a little bit hesitant about actually signing these things, but I think with that disclaimer, we found that tends to help. And if there's ever a project that involves the FHWA Office of Federal Lands, we just ask that you coordinate that with your local bridge office for specific requirements. All right, one last thing I'd like to talk about before we wrap this one up is that we ask that if you're modifying an existing bridge, then please be sure to reach out to your local Coast Guard District Bridge Office early in the plan sheet development process. Why, you ask? Well, for starters, we need to ensure that the plan sheets properly depict the proposed permit action, taking into consideration any existing plan sheets that will either be supplemented or superseded, or a combination of both, supplemented and superseded. Supplementing requires that the existing plans be complete enough to show all necessary attributes in a proper manner. Modification projects are pretty unique, and the requirements are often complex, so early coordination is the key to avoiding potential delays. On this slide, the plan sheet on the right was used to supplement the two existing plan sheets to the left for a bridge that was built back in 1921. We could only do this because the plan sheets on the left were available and showed enough detail of what currently exists and how the proposed modification would alter it. All right, so to recap, everything that I just covered in this presentation is found in the handy-dandy document that we lovingly refer to as the Bridge Permit Application Guide and the Plan Sheet Job Aid. As plan sheets are developed, please reach back to the Coast Guard District Bridge Office with any questions. All right, so that concludes my presentation.
Roger that. Well, good morning. And then again, I'm Matt Robertson. I'm with the Coast Guard's Permits and Policy Division at headquarters in Washington, D.C. And we're going to not quite deviate from the agenda. We'll just have to envision this in your head. The slides are just wonderful, but you have to imagine how these look like. So basically, what the Pell team is, it's Federal Highways and Volpe have developed a team, and it's called the Planning and Environmental Linkages Team. And it's we recently began working with the Pell team to ensure that we're on the same page when it comes to project coordination. They'll be joining us in these state DOT sessions. As Jim said, they were unable to make this session. They provided these slides to just provide the introduction to their concept. I'll do my best to present the material and kind of describe the slide a little bit. It's very basic information. What is Pell? What are the benefits? What are the resources? That kind of thing. And after the fact, Jim can provide these slides so you can see them and get the links for the resources and all that good stuff. A couple important things to note. The Pell process does not impact the existing MOUs and MOAs that the Coast Guard has with the US DOT and Federal Highway. It's a relatively new concept. And the Pell team is still working through criteria for when and how Pell will be introduced for particular projects. Okay, so what is Pell? Pell is a collaborative transportation decision-making approach that considers environmental, community, and economic goals early in the transportation planning process and uses the information, analyses, and products developed during the planning to inform the environmental review process. Goal of Pell is early collaboration to facilitate better planning to inform NEPA reviews to accelerate project delivery. Pell assists in project delivery, like I said, and agencies can agree to a project's purpose and need, define the preliminary range of alternatives, eliminate unreasonable alternatives, and begin public involvement and documentation of planning decisions through Pell. Use of Pell is not required, but highly encouraged by Federal Highway due to the benefits. And those benefits are state and local agencies can achieve significant benefits by incorporating environmental and community values into transportation decisions early in planning and carrying these considerations through the project development and delivery. Builds relationships for agencies, early engagement and sharing the data to align with future requirements, including permitting and approvals, saves time, saves money, which everyone loves. Assists in project delivery. Agencies can agree to project's purpose and need, define the preliminary range of alternatives, eliminate unreasonable alternatives, and begin public involvement and documentation of planning decisions through Pell. And like I said, we have resources and contact information for the Federal Highways folks. And essentially what Pell is just another tool to spark that early coordination that Jim has been hammering and that I'm going to continue to hammer on in my presentation. But theirs is a little bit more of a grand, holistic look at a project from how is this going to affect the community? How is this going to affect the environment? How can we come together to make sure that every aspect of this project is thought of early in the process so we can kind of develop the alternatives to meet everyone's needs as best we can. That's essentially what the Pell process is. And like I said, we'll provide the resources and contacts, but are there any questions that I might be able to answer on the Pell process?
One question that we received so far is you're wanting to get your contact information.
Okay. And Jim will provide that information for you folks. All
Yeah,
right,
we'll actually have it. Yeah, we'll have a slide during my final presentation with my email address, my phone numbers, and again, we also have points of contact on the Coast Guard Bridge page that we've given you the QR code for. So we're very reachable, but worst case scenario, I've got my cell phone 24/7. I have no life. Call me.
Quick question. You said the Pell team was coordination between Federal Highway and Volpe. I'm assuming that's also with the Coast Guard, or is the PL team work on non-Coast Guard related things as well?
They work on everything related to DOT, so whether the Coast Guard's involved or not, if it's a large highway transportation project and there's no bridges involved, they would still use Pell. They don't use Pell for every project, but they're trying to get it more involved with these projects, especially the larger ones. But to answer your question, that regardless of the Coast Guard's involvement in the project, they do use Pell. And they were using, since we were going around to talk to the different state DOTs, they were using the opportunity to kind of get out and spread the message about Pell. It's just kind of a nice partnership that we have with them where they can kind of get an opportunity to spread out a little bit while we're doing it as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Jim, are we ready to roll to the next project? Next slides.
By all means, proceed.
Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. I am still Matt Robertson, and we're going to talk about project timeline development. So we're also going to talk about permitting timetables and bridge permit milestones. These are the tools and tactics that we use to ensure a proposed project is processed as efficiently as possible. During this discussion, our objectives are to understand permitting timetables, describe the milestones for bridge permits, explain this federal permitting dashboard, define dependencies in the permitting process. I think Jim talked about that probably yesterday. Understand dependencies for each of our bridge milestones, and the quote unquote oncoming tidal wave of infrastructure projects. And then I'm not driving this, but if you all want to afterwards, you can go log into the permitting dashboard and kind of look around, and Jim can kind of show you what that thing is all about. All right, so what is a permitting timetable? This is the tool that we use the most for developing a project timeline. Lead, cooperating, and participating agencies work together to develop the timetable based on the milestones for their particular actions. Our federal action is the bridge permit. Permitting timetables are required to be used on all projects on the federal permitting dashboard, which we'll discuss shortly. We also develop permitting timetables for our other bridge projects that are not on the dashboard. Permitting timetables include lead and cooperating agencies' key milestones, provide coordinated timetable for projects, provide a complete picture of the project requirements, require early and frequent coordination,
Take a drink.
ensure all stakeholders are on the same page. Yes, I hope everyone brought enough to drink. Here are the benefits of using the permitting timetable. Resolves issues and conflicts early in the process, sets the navigational clearance expectations early on to inform project alternatives during the NEPA process, mitigates these dependencies, and it lessens unwanted surprises at the permit decision phase. Each federal action, and that is each federal permit or authorization for a project, has designated milestones, which are included on the permitting timetable. Again, ours is the Coast Guard bridge permit. These are the milestones for our bridge permits. And then the right column is who is responsible for actually completing the task. Navigation data submitted, and that's information such as a navigation impact report, submitted by the applicant or the proponent to the Coast Guard. And this should occur early in the scoping process. Issued navigation determination. This preliminary determination provides the minimum navigational clearances acceptable for all proposed permanent and temporary bridges. Clearances are used by the applicant, lead federal agent, or lead federal agency to inform and develop alternatives for the project. This should also occur early in the scoping process. And to provide a little bit of background, I'm not sure if Jim touched on this before, but the Coast Guard used to wait to receive a completed application prior to beginning our review, and that included for navigational clearances. So we would receive an entire application completed with plan sheets and everything before we'd even seen it. And then we would conduct our review, and then we would go back and say, oh, we don't like this. So, and that meant that the preferred alternative had been chosen, the final design for the project was complete, And occasionally, we would determine that the clearances weren't adequate to meet the needs of navigation. As you can imagine, agencies were not happy to spend the time and money to go back to the drawing board. So now we work with the applicant and lead agency very early in the process to determine the minimum clearances that would meet the reasonable needs of navigation. And that way, the alternatives can be developed knowing that the clearances will be adequate. All right, next milestone is the initial application received. This is not the completed final application. This is when the application or the applicant provides us with your initial project information, begins to complete the application template, and provides other application materials such as plan sheets. This may be submitted before or while the draft environmental document and alternatives are developed. And publication of public notice, we typically issue our public notice after the draft environmental document, that's the draft environmental assessment or draft environmental impact statement, has been issued with the preferred alternative chosen. We cannot publish a public notice without plan sheets that are in accordance with the Bridge Permit Application Guide. However, the design does not need to be final for our public notice, such as with design and build projects. The Coast Guard's public notice, when another agency like Federal Highway is lead, serves to alert the public and other stakeholders that we've received an application and are seeking comments related to potential impacts to navigation. We reference the lead agency's environmental document and direct environmental comments to them. Since navigational clearances are examined early in the process, we very rarely receive comments. Application deemed complete. This is once we've received all application materials, and that includes everything listed in the BPAG, the Coast Guard Bridge Permit Application Guide, including the final NEPA documents, such as the finding of no significant impact or record of decision, water quality certificate, coastal zone management determination, and other applicable requirements like 404, 408, those types of things. They all have to be resolved before we determine an application is complete. And lastly, the Coast Guard permit decision is made after receiving a completed application. Our goal is to make the permit decision within 90 days after receiving the FONSI or ROD, provided all other agency permits and requirements have been met. Please note the projects covered under FAST 41 and one federal decision require all permits and authorizations within 90 days after the lead agency or ROD has been issued. So we try to match that up to those requirements. I'll go over what those are too if people aren't familiar with them. And so I talked about the federal permitting dashboard earlier. Out of curiosity, how many in the room there are familiar with the dashboard?
Anybody in here ever seen it? It's good
Heard of
stuff.
it?
Actually, it's a pretty cool website. Definitely worth checking out.
Okay, so is that a no?
That's a no. At least here in the room.
All
I don't
right.
know about online.
Matt, we do
Okay,
have a
well, this is
question.
Oh, sure.
Does the 90 days start at the initial application submitted milestone?
No. The 90 days is
After we've received the completed application. So once the completed application with every, the final environmental document from the lead agency or the finding of no significant impact or record of decision, and we've received all the other requirements like the water quality certificate, 404 from the Corps, if there's a BO, if there's anything from any other agency, we need to have all that in hand before we consider the application complete. And once we do consider it complete, then we have a 90-day, we try to follow a 90-day clock for a permit decision.
We'll send you guys a letter. I mean, we'll send a letter to the applicant and stating that the application is considered complete, and the date of that letter, for our purposes, that's when the clock starts.
Right. And for projects that are not required by law to be completed within 90 days, we still try to match that just to be consistent with those other laws. It may be more than 90 days depending on any circumstances that pop up, any last minute things that we didn't realize were going on, or congressional interest or something like that could slow down the process. But generally, we try to get things wrapped up and a permit decision made within that 90-day period. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that was it. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, we
So
have
this
another
is
one.
just a screen. Oh, please.
So public involvement is included in the 90 days.
Our, so it depends on the type of project, but our public notice, when we are not the lead federal agency, that is usually done much earlier in the process. Once we've received a set of plan sheets and the preferred alternative has been chosen, there's usually a draft document ready, like the draft environmental and impact statement. Once we have that information, that's when we try to go out with our public notice, which is still relatively early in the permitting process. And that's just to, again, go out for questions or concerns regarding to navigation. We will send any questions regarding the environment directly to the lead federal agency for them to handle. But we try to get everything done as far as our public involvement done ahead of time. Now, if we're the lead federal agency and we have an environmental impact statement, then there's the different requirements under NEPA for going through the Federal Register and that kind of public involvement. But those situations for us are very few and far between. I think we've done 2 over the last maybe 5 or 10 years or something like that. We're generally not the lead agency for those big giant projects that require an EIS. Does that help?
Yes, that was it.
Fantastic. All right. So on this slide is just a screenshot of the front page of the Federal Infrastructure Permitting Dashboard. And that's the URL there, the permits.performance.gov. This is a website and dashboard that's open to everyone, including the public. It was initiated back in the Obama administration and really fired up during the Trump administration, and has continued to be used heavily with the Biden administration. And it's an effort to improve coordination, transparency, and accountability within the federal permitting infrastructure permitting community. So the public can essentially see how the sausage is made when it comes to the environmental review and permitting of projects. There are literally hundreds of infrastructure projects currently on the dashboard, and permitting timetables are required for each project on the dashboard. So there are 3 different types or 3 different categories of projects on the dashboard. It's, again, solely for infrastructure projects subject to federal approval. They include surface transportation projects such as highways and railroads, and of course bridges, but also projects such as wind and solar projects, aviation, broadband, electricity transmission, manufacturing, mining, pipelines, waterways, and a few others, including chip production. The computer chip production is now a big one on there. Projects covered under FAST 41, that's Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, Title 41. They've been included on the dashboard for since I think the Obama administration. However, US DOT funded projects, and those would largely be your projects, they're excluded from being covered under FAST 41. So we won't go into them specifically. If there are any specific questions about that act or whatever, I can certainly talk about it, but it would be a big surprise if there are any of your projects that are included under that act. The other projects category, those are the projects that were originally considered major infrastructure projects under Executive Order 13807. That was better known as the One Federal Decision. That EO was enacted under the Trump administration, then rescinded under the Biden administration, only to be resurrected and codified in the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
The new one federal decision only applies to DOT-funded projects. However, they're still working on specific guidance. So there may be state projects with an EIS that would be covered under one federal decision, but we haven't quite figured out how that's going to play into the dashboard. But the last category is the one where we're going to see the vast majority of your state projects. All US DOT agency-funded projects with an EA or EIS are now being included on the dashboard and include a permitting timetable with agency-specific milestones. Federal Highway Administration is the lead federal agency for the majority of bridge projects that require Coast Guard bridge permits. However, it's important to remember that the Coast Guard issues bridge permits for all modes of transportation, including highway, railroad, pipeline, pedestrian, conveyor bridges, and we've even permitted a couple of zip lines that have crossed waterways. So there are currently 25 or so projects on the dashboard in Georgia. However, none of them that I could find include Coast Guard bridges under the Coast Guard's purview. So just listed on this slide are a few examples of the projects in Georgia, and I thought the Spaceport Camden thing was really cool, so I put a picture of what that might look like. It is the lead federal agency's responsibility to publish projects on the dashboard. US DOT agencies like Federal Highway, FTA, etc., only recently began including other agencies' milestones on their projects, including for the Coast Guard. Okay, now back to the dashboard.
Hey, Matt, can I interrupt 1 second? Hey, that project that was mentioned yesterday, I haven't forgotten what the specifics were, but what's that? He was here yesterday, but I guess, but he had mentioned one project that was going on. I was wondering if that was going to be an EA or an EIS, because chances are, if that's the case, that thing's going to eventually wind up on the dashboard as well. Yeah, no, I don't think he's in. All right, yeah, keep going, Matt. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. So back to the dashboard. None of the projects in Georgia include Coast Guard bridge permit milestones. So I've copied a timetable for a bridge project in Massachusetts to use as a better example. This is just a screenshot. You can see the different federal actions on the left that are applicable to this project, including the Coast Guard bridge permit. Selecting a federal action on the left allows you to view individual milestones and target completion dates. So again, on the left side, you see the blue federal actions. And if you click on one of those, then you will see the details of that particular action. When you select Coast Guard bridge permit, you can see our milestones. And those are the ones I just went over. And in this case, it shows the target dates, whether it's been completed or not. And you can actually click on those as well for further, down at the bottom there, for further action details. And again, if Jim, I don't know if you're planning to do this, but you can log into the dashboard after this presentation to kind of better illustrate its capabilities, search functions, and all that stuff if anyone is interested.
I'll see if we can do that. Generally, we have the monitors here, and of course, I can't get my laptop into the Teams presentation here for GDOT, but maybe we might be able to figure out some kind of workaround.
Sure. And just permits.performance.gov, and it's a pretty cool tool. You can look at what all is going on within your state and within your country, really, to see the different projects. It's a neat tool. So while working through these dashboard projects across the country, we discovered several previously unrealized dependencies. And Jim, I believe, already touched on these yesterday. But this is when the timing of our milestones is directly dependent on the timing of milestones or actions of other agencies or other entities involved in the project. In other words, we cannot complete our milestones on schedule without other entities completing theirs. Understanding dependencies is vital when developing permitting timetables and milestone target dates. We have permitting milestones and provide examples of dependencies for each. Our first two milestones, which are navigation data submitted and issue preliminary navigation clearance determination, rely on the applicant or lead agency to provide us navigation data for the navigation impact report. So that's dependent on
others for us to get the information back to the applicant. For initial applications submitted, we're dependent on the applicant to provide the information required to us, and the applicant's dependent on others to provide them the information needed for the application. So it's like an inception of dependencies there. For the publication of public notice, we can't send out our public notice until the applicant provides us plan sheets in accordance with that BPAG. For an application to be deemed complete, we need all of the information, including the final NEPA document and all other requirements outlined in the Bridge Permit Application Guide. And for example, the 404, the WQC, the CZM, like we discussed earlier. For the permit decision rendered, it's dependent on receiving a completed application. We cannot move forward with our decision until we have everything that we have requirement for in the Bridge Permit Application Guide. So those are kind of a quick run through of our milestones, dependencies for our milestones, a little bit about how we build our permitting timetable to make sure that a project stays on schedule and that there are no surprises at the end. So why is all of this so important? Federal agencies and resource experts are preparing for what regulators are called an oncoming tidal wave of infrastructure projects. You may have heard of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It was signed into law in November 2021. But what does this mean for you? And you probably already know a little bit about this. Some of the items in the Jobs Act may impact work in your state and could involve projects that require bridge permits from the Coast Guard. And just kind of zooming down the list, $110 billion for roads and bridges, of that $26.5 billion to DOT for 15,000 specific bridges, invest $90 billion for public transit, including rail, $17 billion for port infrastructure and waterways. So there's a lot of money being tossed out for infrastructure projects to the states, and obviously a lot of those could involve Coast Guard bridge permits. Also, NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, now requires a 2-year period between the notice of intent to prepare an EIS and the record of decision for all EIS projects, and 1 year from the agency decision to prepare an environmental assessment to the publication of the FONSI for EA projects. So these timelines are getting much tighter for federal agencies and applicants to kind of get their stuff together, which requires early and frequent coordination to ensure that everybody's on the same page and we can meet these tight time frames. Permitting timetables are used to ensure projects stay schedule. Okay, here's the bottom line. Funding for infrastructure projects, including for bridges, is increasing. And there have been subsequent acts that have come out of Congress, Inflation Reduction Act, and some others that are also throwing more money into infrastructure type projects. There will likely be many more bridge projects funded in each state across the country. USDOT publishes all EIS and EA projects on the federal permitting dashboard. And like I said, there are about 25 or so in Georgia currently. All projects on the dashboard require permitting timetables. Permitting timetables are important tools to ensure the project timeline is on schedule. Early, frequent coordination is key to managing dependencies and meeting project schedules. Are there any questions? And I don't know if you're able to or want to go through the dashboard from there, but you're certainly welcome to do so. Jim can kind of give you a quick tour of that. Otherwise, again, it's permits.performance.gov, and you can probably just do it on your phone in there if you are just kind of curious. There's once you get to the main screen, there's a map on the front page, and you can zoom into that map, and it'll have little dots all over the map, and you can actually find a project in Georgia just by going to the dot, if that makes sense. You just click on it, it'll give you the project information. There's also a projects page that you can search for projects individually in your particular state or anywhere in the country. But with that, are there any questions about anything I've discussed?
10:35. I think we can, so, all right, and Brian, you're ready, right? Brian? Okay. I
Yes,
see the-
sir, ready to go.
Okay, just keep this slide right here is good for right now. Okay, all right, who am I? I wrestle at night with these existential questions, but let's talk about the FHWA liaison position and the stuff that I'm expected to do day in, day out, and what sort of help I can offer other agencies stuck with working with the Coast Guard on a bridge project. We're going to touch on the MOA between the Coast Guard and FHWA, 144C projects, and advance approval. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, in a nutshell, the primary and sole reason I'm alive right now is to function as a communications conduit between the Coast Guard, FHWA, and state-level DOT agencies. I'm additionally expected to help instill a sense of procedural consistency across the board, which should foster efficiency, we hope. In order to accomplish this, I've been spending a bunch of time on the road visiting various agencies to deliver sessions such as the one you're sitting in right now, with the hope and expectation that you'll gain some insight as to what the Coast Guard Bridge Program is about, what we do, and why we do it. Okay, MOA stuff. The Coast Guard and FHWA signed an updated Memorandum of Agreement in 2014, which superseded the previous Memorandum of Understanding between both agencies that had been signed way back in 1981. An update was necessary given the transfer of the Coast Guard from DOT to DHS back in 2003, as well as to comply with Executive Order 13604, which called for a reduction in the time that was needed to render a permit decision. That same EO also directed federal agencies to work together and share information, which should enhance interagency efficiency by eliminating duplication of effort. So, the MOA clarifies that the Coast Guard will determine what constitutes adequate navigation clearances for a bridge project FHWA happens to be involved in, as well as establishing our procedural responsibilities. It also outlines agency-specific processes and, importantly, calls for a coordinated environmental document if appropriate. The idea behind all this is to get everybody working on the project playing off the same sheet of music, as it were. And for the most part, it's worked. Out of all the agencies we deal with, when it comes to bridge projects, FHWA seems to get the lion's share of our attention. Therefore, it makes sense that we have a liaison who's able to talk directly with FHWA and deal with any problems before they become problems. All right, now we get to the good part. Let's talk a little bit about those occasions when you may not have to nail down a full-blown bridge permit. 23 U.S.C. 144C2, or more commonly referred to simply as 144C. Bottom line, no bridge permits will be required for a proposed bridge to be built across a waterway that is tidal, but used only by recreational vessels less than 21 feet in length and/or are not used nor susceptible to use in the natural condition of the waterway or by reasonable improvement as a means to transport interstate or foreign commerce. The trick to 144C is that FHWA will make that initial determination, but it will be forwarded to the Coast Guard in the guise of a recommendation. The Coast Guard, by law, will have a, quote, informative and persuasive role in the determination process, unquote. In other words, it's up to the Coast Guard to either agree with the FHWA determination or to disagree, along with substantive reasons as to why the Coast Guard will require a permit for the project to proceed. Luckily, we developed yet another checklist, and it's available on our website for use. So let's go over that in further detail. Okay, here it is in all its glory, the 144C checklist. As an aside, FHWA doesn't necessarily need to complete the form. It can be filled out at the state level by Georgia DOT folks, but it must be submitted to the Coast Guard by FHWA. That means they should have a pretty good idea as to what's being asked for. Here's a snapshot of what the checklist looks like. You can find it on the Public Bridge website under Permit Exemption Decision Tool. All right, some of the preliminaries that we're going to be looking for. Name of the waterway, obviously. We're going to ask if it's navigable in accordance with 33 CFR 2.36. We'll also be looking for the mile point when you're looking to build this thing, measured in statute miles, not nautical. Also, if there's a bridge there already, is it permitted, either by the Coast Guard or Army Corps? Finally, you'll need to figure out the type and variety of vessel traffic utilized in the waterway, keeping in mind the previous stuff that I talked about, like recreational traffic under 21 feet in length, reasonable improvement, and all that other good stuff. And apparently my computer's decided to die. When it rains, it pours. So I'm gonna have to do this kind of extemporaneously. All right, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna go over a couple scenarios, all right? And kind of play a little game. Is it 144C or not? All right? And what we're dealing with here is a bridge out in Idaho, the Stoddard Pack Bridge, which is located very, very, very well inland. It's in Idaho. All right, this was a pedestrian bridge. It was built primarily for pack animals, hikers, things of that nature. But it was wiped out in a landslide a few years back. And again, I have the particulars on my presentation, so I don't know what year in what it was built specifically. But again, we had a landslide that managed to go ahead and wipe out the piers, or one pier on one side. The decision was made to go ahead and reconstruct the bridge, but diagonally, so that it went off at an angle, so it wouldn't be the new pier, or the new abutment rather, wouldn't be located in the same area where we had actually had the landslide. The question, of course, is whether or not this project would require a permit or not. All right, now we actually have a 144C process flow chart here. And the first question we're going to ask is the bridge located over tidal waters? All right, we're looking at Idaho. The answer is definitely no, it's not. So you go over to the right, you follow that no, and then you go to 23 U.S.C. 144C 2A, alpha. Is the bridge located waters over that are used or susceptible to use in the natural condition or by reasonable improvement as a means of transport interstate or foreign commerce? You would think the answer to that one would be no. Because again, this is a pedestrian bridge, non-tidal waterway. But, believe it or not, the state, I want to say, was it Montana or Wyoming? But at any rate, the state that is adjoins on that waterway, they were actually running jet boats for hire, carrying passengers for hire on that waterway, and actually met another waterway that was a conduit for interstate commerce. So the answer to that was actually yes. So in that event, 144C did not apply, and we actually did require a bridge permit in order for this one to proceed. So, and again, you know, the best way, yeah, hit me.
Now, even in that case, if the boat's less than 21 feet, it's commercial, not recreational, right?
Yes, interstate commerce. So that's the thing to go ahead and keep in mind. Again, we're looking at recreational traffic under 21 feet in length. Have it. Okay, now in Massachusetts, we have the Atlantic Avenue Bridge over Little Harbor Inlet. And we're going to go ahead and let you guys kind of play along with this one. It's a place up in Massachusetts. Summertime is a cool place to hang out. Wintertime, obviously not so much. At any rate, we had a highway bridge there that required replacement just because of the fact that it's structurally deficient. And the decision was made, okay, let's build a new one. Let's get a replacement going. Okay, there you can see the temp bridge and the bridge being built, as well as a snapshot looking at the typical traffic. Now, not knowing an awful lot about this particular bridge, other than the fact that it's by the ocean, and so it's definitely tidal in nature, what do you guys think? Would we be looking at a 144C exemption, or do you think a permit would be required? Okay, you're going back to our tool. It is definitely located over tidal waters. Okay, and the next question we ask is the waterway used only by small vessels, recreational boating, fishing, and other small vessels less than 21 feet in length. That preceding photograph that you saw on the previous slide, that is the typical traffic utilizing this waterway and proceeding on the bridge. You're talking about kayakers, paddle boarders. That's really just about it. Yeah. Yeah, this is probably about the guy in the middle and the one kayak and the one paddle board. That's about the biggest vessel you're going to see. So he's king of the hill right there. All right, so back to the sun. There we go. So yes, the answer is yes. All right, then we ask, is the bridge located over waters that are used or susceptible to be used in their natural condition or by reasonable improvement as a means to transport interstate or foreign commerce? And you had asked that question before. No. All right, it's no. The answer is no, because again, there's no major port, there's no major nexus of transportation. There's no anticipation that that tiny little town is going to become, port for Supermax vessels that are going to be bringing in cargoes. So no, it's not going to happen. So in that particular instance, yeah, 144C applied, and it did not require a permit to go ahead and proceed. Oh, yeah, hit me.
So who can answer those questions?
The district bridge office can go ahead and answer those questions. Those are the guys that you're going to need to talk to. Okay? But again, FHWA is the one that's going to make that the initial determination. So it should really be FHWA and the district bridge office, again, early and frequent coordination and communication. That's the bottom line. Again, that's what we need in order to go ahead and proceed with this. Okay, now let's talk about advance approval. Again, if you're bored one night and you want to go ahead and have some exciting reading, read through 33 CFR 115.70. Okay, and basically this reg, without pulling it up directly, just states that if you've got a waterway that is transited solely by small recreational vessels, we don't put a number on it for the actual size, but small motorboats, logs, log rafts, things of that nature, paddle boards, then we're going to consider the waterway to be advance approval. And so it will not require a bridge permit in order to go and proceed. We've relied on this on certain occasions when we weren't able to get a 144C. It's happened a couple times. Out in Hawaii, we had one waterway that was actually transited by outriggers. And I don't know if you've ever seen the outriggers, but they're rather long. And unfortunately, we couldn't make 144C stick. But on the flip side, we were able to go the advance approval route. So it's something to go ahead and keep in mind. All right, and Jamie was kind of ramming this home yesterday. Again, feel free to go ahead and sign up for our Gov Delivery. And every couple months or so, we'll go ahead and send you guys an email. And it's worth it. We're not going to spam your inbox, but we'll keep you updated with stuff that's going on in the bridge program. Contact us. There's my contact info. Feel free to call. All right? And it's all good. All right? So anybody got any questions? And like I said, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. The district folks you'll be dealing with are down in Miami. So again, that is your district bridge office, the Southern District Bridge Office down in Miami.